Scientific studies have linked fluoridation of the water supply to lowered IQs, increased risk of cancer, and bone disease, amongst other conditions. So why do we still fluoridate? As researchers like Anthony Gucciardi warn, fluoridation may in fact only be the thin edge of the wedge when it comes to forced medication of the population. This is the GRTV Backgrounder on Global Research TV. As the scientific evidence of the dangers of water fluoridation continues to mount, there is no longer any room for doubt. Those who deny that adding hydrofluorosilicic acid to the water supply is in fact causing untold medical harm are simply ignorant of the scientific data on the subject. From peer-reviewed studies in prestigious journals to the experimental evidence compiled by some of the best-regarded scientists in the field, there can no longer be any doubt that water fluoridation is impairing brain function and development in children, increasing cancer rates, interfering with thyroid function, contributing to rising incidence of skeletal fluorosis, and exacerbating conditions like osteoporosis and cardiovascular disease.
Harvard researchers have found children who live in high fluoride areas have significantly lower IQs than those who live in low fluoride areas.
There is no data that shows fluoride used in fluoridation practices helps prevent tooth decay. Even in topically used situations, data has shown that fluoride actually rots teeth as opposed to helping them. Teeth rot when the enamel on the outside of the tooth becomes compromised and acid begins to eat away at the inside of the tooth. If acid sits on the outside of the tooth, over time it begins to kill the adenosine diphosphatase and the enamel weakens. The problem with fluoride is, once it comes in contact with teeth, it kills the adenosine diphosphatase, which in turn compromises tooth enamel. As the findings of chemist-researcher Dr. Gerard F. Judd show, not only does he find that fluoride rots the teeth, but there is absolutely no need for fluoride in creating strong tooth enamel.
Our union represents the staff, scientists, lawyers, and others who analyze hazard exposure and economic data and advise management how to use them in public health protection. I'm not here today to speak for EPA, but rather the union, founded 17 years ago to protect EPA workers from unethical pressure by EPA managers. It was on that basis in 1985 that we first got involved in this issue. In 1997, we voted to oppose fluoridation, and our opposition has grown stronger as more adverse data on the practice has come in. In the interest of time, let me state our recommendations first. We ask that you order an independent review of the cancer bioassay of sodium fluoride mandated in 1977 by Congress. Evidence for carcinogenicity in that assay was systematically downgraded by a special executive branch commission appointed and run by the very agencies that Congress did not trust to run the bioassay in the first place.
I think parents should know that fluoride is an extremely active chemical when it gets into our body. It can interfere with the pineal gland. It can interfere with the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland and the pineal gland are both intimately involved with brain development, mental development.
A real concern with young kids, especially with newborn infants, is that the blood-brain barrier is not fully developed at that point, and when children are drinking a formula made with fluoridated drinking water, they're getting a huge an inappropriate dose of fluoride in the developing brain. This may be part of the reason, for instance, of the depression of IQ that we've seen in these Chinese studies.
Our studies involve comparing the deaths of all persons in the 10 largest fluoridated cities of the United States with the 10 largest non-fluoridated cities in the United States year by year. And we obtained a very remarkable curve, which you can see here perhaps. Here is the fluoridated, and here is the non-fluoridated set of 10 cities each. Here's where the fluoridation started, and before this time, both sets of cities were identical. But no sooner had fluoridation started than this curve began to go up. The deaths began to increase, so that this effect occurs very promptly within 1, 2, or 5 years.
On a positive note, community after community around the globe is bringing this issue to a head by forcing referenda or plebiscites on the practice of water fluoridation. And little by little, concerned citizen activists are working to get the fluoride removed from the water supply in increasing numbers of towns and cities.
Next to Calgary, that city has decided to stop putting fluoride in its drinking water. City Council yesterday voted overwhelmingly in favor of removing the chemical after 20 years of using it.
And other Queensland councils decided to remove fluoride from its drinking water. Fraser Coast councillors today voted overwhelmingly against continuing the practice.
More than 30,000 people weighed in on the debate. In the end, the difference was just 195 votes in favor of stopping the fluoridation of Waterloo water.
Well, I was pro-fluoride. I've said yes to fluoride. So for me, it's up to the citizens, and that's what the referendum's all about.
While it is heartening to see more and more activists taking up the fight to get this toxic chemical removed from their local water supply, this work is of necessity piecemeal and subject to setbacks. Even as some communities work to remove the fluoride, others, like Portland, Oregon, the largest urban center in the US currently without a fluoridation program, are preparing to vote on whether to add it to their supply. It may be tempting to say that this democratic process is fair but frustrating. After all, we often hear, the will of the people must be respected. This viewpoint, however, is not only wrong, it is dangerously wrong. The real issue behind the practice of water fluoridation is not merely that the hydrofluorosilicic acid that is misleadingly called sodium fluoride is a toxic brew of industrial waste products that is causing untold medical harm. It is that this creates the precedent for the forced drugging of our society. As long as the fluoride myth is not confronted head-on for what it actually is, then the Center for Disease Control and like-minded institutions will continue to promote it as one of the 10 greatest public health achievements of the 20th century, as they do. This, in effect, serves to paper over the fact that what is being advocated is the forced medication of an entire population, without regard to the unwitting patient's size, age, sex, race, background, or medical history, and without giving that patient a method for opting out of the program. Every day, millions of people in different parts of the globe drink, shower in, bathe, and otherwise absorb and ingest this unprescribed medicine, almost without exception, without the informed consent of those individuals. Earlier this week, I talked to author and researcher Anthony Gucciardi of naturalsociety.com about this aspect of the fluoridation program and why it is so significant. Perhaps another possible suggestion for an answer as to why we are still drinking fluoride is because the fluoridation program itself sets a type of precedent whereby the government can come along and decide that the population needs a certain supplement in their water supply, so they will simply put it in there for them, whether they like it or not, regardless of dose, regardless of age, regardless of their ability to process it, etc., etc. And that, if that were to be removed from the water supply, that would take away an important precedent for the people who want to have the government to have that power. Let's talk a little bit about what fluoridation really means philosophically in terms of what the government believes it can do to its citizens.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think that's actually the most important part of this, besides the fact that fluoride is making people stupid, and it is actually making them care less about things. It's a similar component in what's used in many antidepressant-type drugs, where we know that that's actually linked to a lot of problems such as suicidal thoughts and everything. But yeah, sodium fluoride is basically the way the government comes in and says, you people need this because it prevents cavities. Well, that's actually such a low issue overall medically, that what if they came in, and they are saying this now, heart disease, the #1 killer, right? They're talking about putting statins in the water. And that is so much higher of importance than cavities that they're going to push it so much harder. And people don't even understand that statins, even the FDA has admitted now that there's so many risks associated with statins, they had to put something out. And cholesterol lowers in general, it's very damaging to the body. But now they're also talking about putting some type of antidepressants in the water, I was reading in the mainstream news some time ago. So where is the line drawn? If we let them fluoridate the water for such a minor thing, such as cavities, where's the line drawn? Because they can go crazy with it. And they can also introduce this into every other industry as well, such as they're talking about putting statins, and they've done it. They've grown biopharmaceutical crops which have statins in them. So if we let them get to our water, they're ultimately going to control the food. And what else are they going to control? You're right. It's a red line that we need to draw and say, stop, this is not acceptable. But people don't seem to understand where this is headed, in my opinion.
Indeed, exactly as Gucciardi notes, the idea of using the fluoridation program as an explicit justification for adding further medications to the drinking water is already being introduced to the public.
Right, so when you go in for your blood test now, especially you, Joe, being over a certain age, you're going to say, not only check my HDL and LDL, make sure they put HSCRP in there as well.
Reactive Why don't they just put statins in the water or something?
A lot of people have said that, and they are in the water, in fact.
Because that would be a communist plot, just like fluoride in the water.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to point out is that fluoride, which is widely available in the United States, the Surgeon General has determined that it is possibly the most cost-effective health intervention in the history of the United States, that it saves hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars, per person in dental care over the course of lifetimes. And it's the reason why Americans tend to have very good teeth, and if you go abroad to some countries, people tend not to have as good teeth, with the same other dental hygiene care, because our fluoride protects our teeth, and there is no evidence that that fluoride, no credible evidence, does any damage. So this is an experiment that's been tried. I think the other most interesting area to look at would be in basic nutrients added to the drinking water to protect specific populations. A good example might be alcoholics, who are at risk of certain neurodegenerative disorders, for example, from lack of thiamine. And adding a trace amount of thiamine to the drinking water, if it could be done relatively cost-effectively, might prevent alcoholics from developing what's called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome.
First, the U.S. has been adding a fluoride to its public water supply for decades, and of course to prevent tooth decay. Well, now researchers from Japan are suggesting that we add lithium. So why is that?
Well, they're actually not suggesting it, but they're certainly looking into it. Lithium is a medication that in prescription doses treats mood disorders in people with bipolar disorder or manic depressive illness. And what these researchers found in Japan is that lithium is present in trace amounts in the normal water supply in some communities. And in those communities, they have a lower suicide rate. And so they're really investigating whether trace amounts of lithium can just change the mood in a community enough to really, in a positive way, without having the bad effects of lithium, to really affect the mood and decrease the suicide rate. Very interesting concept. You know, it's the same reason why we put iodine and salt, fluoride and water. There's many different examples of when we put trace amounts of chemicals in the normal supply of food or water to help people's health.
Right, although this is the first where they're actually affecting people's moods and, you know, the brain. So that, I'm sure, puts up a lot of red flags for people.
It doesn't take a professional bioethicist to understand how such an idea, even if implemented by the best-intentioned doctors for the best-intentioned reasons, adhering to the best practices conceivable via modern medicine, could still be a fundamental violation of human rights and, in fact, a crime against humanity, no less egregious than the human experimentation in the Nazi death camps that the civilized world has long since shunned. Fluoridation, in short, is a medically and scientifically bankrupt practice that has long since been discredited as a means of preventing tooth decay. Its political utility for those who wish to use this precedent of the forced drugging of an entire population, however, means it is not a practice that will be abandoned easily by the CDC, EPA, FDA, and the entire pharmaceutical industrial complex that is increasingly eager to start adding other drugs to the water supply. It is incumbent on activists everywhere, then, to lend their efforts to eradicating the water fluoridation program in their own area and assisting others in ridding it from theirs. Only then can this practice be exposed for the crime against humanity that it is, and all such ideas of drugging the water supply can be properly consigned to the dustbin of history. For more on this story and other breaking news and current events, please go to globalresearch.ca. For more research and analysis by James Corbett, please go to corbettreport.com.